Welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. I'm your host, Kendra Rinaldi. This is a space to explore the full spectrum of grief, from the kind that comes with death to the kind that shows up in life's many transitions. Through stories and conversations, we remind each other that we're not alone. Your journey matters, and here we're figuring it out together. Let's dive right in to today's episode. Today I'm chatting with Randi Pearlman Wolfson. She is the founder and writer at Grief and Grits. She is based out of Los Angeles, and she is a grief educator and author. She recently released a book called Eddie's Brave Journey. It's a beautiful children's book. Little Elephant. It's the main character. We'll be talking about this character and just really what brought you, Randi, to this space of talking about grief. As here I am with a podcast about grief. You have an Instagram account that has a lot of information about grief, and now you have a book. So I'm excited for this conversation. So welcome, Randi.
Thank you, Kendra. I'm really honored to be with you. I've been following your page and your podcast for quite a while, so I'm excited to be with you. Um, I would say that what brought me to this space was kind of accidental in a way. I actually was working in the field of grief for about 12 years, and I left that position. And when I left, I needed to kind of figure out what was I going to do with all the knowledge that I had and my own personal experience of my dad dying when I was 10 years old. And I thought, there's just got to be a way that I can kind of combine my personal experience with the professional experience to be able to give people just a different perspective to hear from a lifelong griever, literally, with a dash of personal experience and a dash of professional experience kind of thrown in together. So I started exactly 8 years ago on Facebook. I told myself that if I got 50 people to follow me by the end of the year in December, that I would keep going. And here I am 8 years later, and it's just been a really wonderful community. A few months later, I started on Instagram, and I've enjoyed really every minute of being here in the social media space, which I know is an unusual thing to hear because there's so much negative, but maybe you have found the same thing, that in the grief community, I feel like, it's just such a lovely, caring, compassionate community. So it's
You you
wonderful.
you said exactly what I was going to say is because you've created community. You're not on social media to just show everything that you are. You are there to create community. And I could see that on your posts, like the comments that people share. There's a lot of interaction within your posts. It's not just people consuming it, but also interacting with what you're sharing. So
Yeah.
you're building that community of allowing people to be seen with what you're sharing. And so that I think is what makes it really special and compelling and for you not draining, because really it could be so draining when we're just
Yeah.
posting and it not feeling like is being received. But when you're having this communication with your community and it becomes a space in which within the comments they're creating relationships too, right? That's really magical.
Yeah. I love that you noticed that and that you said that. And I agree. It's magical is a great word. Um, because grief is so lonely. And I think that was one of my biggest goals, was to be able to create a community. And thank goodness so many people like yourself and so many other, pages on Instagram have been able to do that as well in the grief space. And um, it's really one of the biggest honors of my life, to be honest. Uh, it is magical.
All right. Now we're going to dive into a little bit more of your journey as your 10-year-old self. And as you were talking about being 10 when your dad died, I had this question of like, oh, well, why did you decide on a children's book? And then in my head, right, that was like one of the questions I thought I was going to ask you. But then I'm thinking, well, maybe she was writing it for her own 10-year-old self. Like, I wonder if this was what she would have needed as a 10-year-old self. Is that the case?
Absolutely. So it's important to have context, especially because I was 10 years old when he died. It was 1966. I had just turned 10 a couple of months prior. And there was nothing to read. The only book my mom, a 35-year-old widow, could find in the library was something like, Now You Are a Widow, Here's What to Do with Your Finances. And that was it. There were no children's books. Thank goodness. That is very different today. But yeah, about a year after I started Grief and Grits, I was really just sitting on my sofa, and in popped this little elephant, and the whole story kind of unfolded right then and there of what was going to happen with this little elephant who was grieving the death of his grandpa and was going to meet other animals along the way that would help him navigate his grief. And so, yeah, that is exactly how the book came about. And um, definitely for my own little 10-year-old heart, no doubt about it. Yeah.
Oh, so beautiful. So in that moment, then your mom had found then a book for herself. How were you guided then in your grief back then? Like what was there were you members of a community that supported? Was your grief talked about at all or not? Was your own emotion were your own emotions acknowledged? And are you the only child or do
I
you
have
have
an older
siblings?
brother. He
Older
was
brother?
14. Yeah.
14. How
Yeah.
were the two of you then kind of, yeah, supported in that process then?
It's a wonderful question. So the one thing that I do remember was my mom always allowed for conversation about my dad. So often, especially back then, you would hear people say, kind of put pictures away, stop talking about the person, just, move on. And my mother must have had some sort of an intuitive um, knowledge that talking about him would be the right thing to do. So we never stopped talking about my dad. As far as feelings go, I would say nobody knew what to do with feelings. Even in school, my mom has told me later as I got older, that she asked my teacher, I was in fifth grade, how is Randy doing? And the teacher would say, oh, she's fine. Because I was kind of a shy, quiet girl. I was doing okay with my schoolwork. And so everybody decided I was fine. And, of course, we know there's nothing fine about being 10 years old and your dad dying. So I don't remember a doctor ever saying, how is your grief? How are you doing? I heard your dad died. Um, so I think nobody knew. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody had the words really. Um, so sadly, I don't think I really ever began to address my grief until maybe 10, 12 years later, when I was in a program becoming a therapist and needed to go into therapy, and then began to address my grief, which I've done at various times throughout my life, because as you grow, of course, you see your grief differently, you feel it differently. So, yeah, thank goodness. I think that today, things are so different. There are grief support groups, there's therapy, there's grief camps for children, so many books now. So I'm so grateful for that. to be able to see that today. And even
Mm.
with all of that, it still is so hard to talk about.
Mhm. It is. It's like even if we know, like we know we're gonna die. We know we experience grief all the time. I actually recorded a little episode that I have not released yet, but talking about literally, we feel grief every second. Actually, by the time this airs, I would have already released it, but we
Yeah,
feel grief every single day because I think that a lot of times, like the things that we think are like I give this example in the recording that I did. It was like, let's say I make a dinner and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to taste amazing. And oh my gosh, I added this. Da, da, da. You sit down at the dinner table and all of a sudden your family takes a bite, you take a bite, and either maybe it's too salty, maybe it's too this. And there's this disappointment, there's this letdown. I literally experience grief in that because the idea of what I thought was going to be is not. You experience grief if like you're expecting to see a friend and all of a sudden they cancel on you and you really were looking forward to that call. I
right.
don't think it's just this emotion of disappointment. I really think there's a grief and in these in a lot of the emotions that we just kind of call one thing. I really think that grief, like you said, is this underlying character in our lives constantly.
I so agree with that, and I'll take that one step further
Please,
because
please.
what a beautiful way to start teaching children about grief before they experience the death of, let's say, a pet or a special person in their life. That we can start talking about those kinds of feelings even before they have that experience. So I love what you're saying, especially as a tool for beginning to teach children
Yeah, the
how
conversation.
to navigate
Yeah. Yeah, how to talk about it. Yeah, I worked with kids and there was one case in which this girl, like, it was like a drop off and the mom had dropped off and she did not want to play with the other kids and she was like sitting in this little corner. And so I go to her and I'm like, I say her name and I'll just say Randy because
Yeah.
I'm like, Randy, what what's going on? She's like, I miss my mommy. And I'm like, oh, I understand. And I'm like, you know what? Did you know that you can miss your mommy and have fun at the same time? Did you know that? Because your mommy,
Beautiful.
she misses you too. She's missing you too, but she also wants you to have a good time. So how about we go over to the circle and join the friends? And she came over and like I still get chills because it was
I
not
got chills too.
I got chills because it's not a language I would have used when I did this, 'cause it was basically I went back to doing what I used to do a long time ago and did it. But with this knowledge of really that these emotions were grief, man, I'm like, man, if I could do parenting all over again with my
Oh, yeah.
can I please just do my parenting all over again? I do over, please. I think I have the right words now to use for my kids when they were 2 and 3 and not now as,
Right,
anyway,
right.
but it is what it is. So anyway, yes, it does help to have this understanding. Let's go back to Eddie in the character. So the friends he has a community, the people he encounters along the way. Share a little bit about that and also how that has played a part in your life to have people in your community.
Oh, yeah. Eddie, just to give you a little context about who he is, he's a little elephant. His grandpa Joe has died, and
That's
he
my
is,
grandpa's name.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, oh. Well, I wanted it to be a character that, anybody could relate to. There is a place in the book where the child, the reader, is asked, "Would you like to tell me who in your life has died?" So what I did was, Eddie has a best friend who's a squirrel named Solly. Solly was my dad's name. His name was Saul, and his nickname was Solly. So of course I had to get him into my book somehow. And Solly the squirrel is Eddie's best friend who comes along with him on this very brave journey to go figure out how to navigate these great big feelings. And Solly in the book asks questions of the reader to help them have conversation about their grief. So it's very helpful to the parent or caregiver who's reading it, um, to get some conversation going that might otherwise be difficult to know how to open up. And so Eddie goes along and he learns from uh, Pip the hippopotamus how to deal with anger. There's a zebra who does exactly what you were just talking about and teaches Eddie about how you can have two feelings at the same time, more than one feeling at the same time. Just like she has two colors on her. And she doesn't have to choose which one she likes better. She can have them, she can like both of
I
them at the
love
same
it, love it,
time.
love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So there's, several animals that he comes across that help him make his way all the way to the end of the book where he feels like now he has some understanding of his great big feelings and his grief, and that he learns that he can always hold memories close to his heart and always remember his grandpa Joe. And the illustrations are beautiful. And what's nice about the book is I think, because the illustrations are lovely, you can sit a 1-year old in your lap and begin to just look at the pictures and start naming the animals and just start using the word grief and death and died. And the other thing about my book is I do use what I call real language. Grandpa Joe has died. He has not been lost or passed away. He has died because it's
he has
very
not gone to sleep and then not woken up.
exactly. With children are very, very literal. And so we have to make sure that we're using the correct words. And I explain in the book what that means when somebody dies. And I don't use any religious words because I feel it's important that families, bring into the book what their own religious beliefs are. Um, so that's basically what Eddie is about. And he's very sweet. And, elephants are just amazing animals. And,
What made you
um,
choose an elephant to be Eddie? Because I don't,
well,
yeah, and
elephants,
yeah,
yeah,
what is
well,
it for you?
because they grieve. They have been studied to, when an elephant dies, they gather around the elephant,
Mm,
and, they have they experience those emotions, and so I just knew that it would be appropriate to plus they're just, amazing animals. They're so, big and majestic, and mostly because they grieve, and I thought it would be a perfect animal. Yeah.
that's so great. I did not know that. I did not know that that's how they
Isn't that
navigate.
something? Yeah.
Yeah. Now you then Eddie has this community. How was it then for you as you started and you then became a therapist for
Yes.
what type of therapy? And then what then made you kind of shift? You said you worked in the grief space before.
Yes.
So share with us your professional journey as well and how your grief, your own grief kind of informed the way that you led your life.
Yes, absolutely. So, I thought I was gonna be a teacher like my dad, who was a school teacher, 4th and 5th grade school teacher. And I decided that that wasn't quite for me, and so I ended up going to school to become a therapist, a marriage and family therapist. And, basically saw I was very young at the time, so I saw a lot of young people, I saw groups, um, and for a while was involved in raising my family. And then when I decided to get back into, doing therapy or something, I thought, it's time to really kind of dive into grief. And so I found a place where I was able to, I started as a volunteer and then I ended up getting a job and worked for, like I said, about 12, 13 years. And it was just time for me to leave that particular job. And that's when, Grief and Grit started. And what has been the biggest surprise is being able to really interact with so many more people that way and from all over the world, really. And so it's just been amazing. Did I answer your question? I
Yes, you did, you
Good.
did, you did. Thank you. I wanted to ask because my daughter asked me this. She's 17. She asked me this, "Mom, you're always talking about grief. Doesn't that make you sad?" I ask you that because I'll tell you what, doesn't that make you sad to always talk about grief?
Yeah.
Randy, please share
Yes.
how does it make you feel to talk about grief?
Yes. It's really the
I
most. I know
I don't
you
I don't
you
I don't
you
have
won't see
I don't
me,
have
but
you I know. I'll only use I'll use this I could use this clip for putting it up there on social media, but it's like, yeah, I don't use it for because he'll be listening to it. But yeah, we have our big
big smiles, right?
smiles ear to ear.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun, 17-year-olds, adults ask the same question. But I'll tell you something funny. I remember, like, when I first began working in the field, specifically around grief, you'd be at a party or an event or whatever, and, people ask, what do you do? And of course, at first you say, oh, I work in the field of grief. And usually people kind of stop. Oh, isn't that hard? Oh, that's so sad. And then within about a minute, they start telling you about, well, when my mom died or when my brother died, and the next thing you know, they just want to spill their heart out. But it is not entirely sad. I don't want to
Mhm,
say that it isn't sad
mhm,
because, of course, at times it is sad. I mean, you know, when you're sitting across from people and taking in their stories and um, really, you know, being in it with somebody,
mhm. Holding space
it's
and really being
and
present. Mhm,
absolutely. I mean, you feel what they're feeling, but as a profession and as a human being, there has been no greater honor, really, in my life than to be able to talk with people about grief. And grief has to come out, it cannot stay in. And it will come out in some way, hopefully in healthy ways. And I think that's what those of us who are working in the field, providing these spaces on Instagram or therapies, as a therapist, as a group leader, whatever it is to make sure that people do have healthy and safe ways to, move grief from the inside to the outside. And so that there is nothing sad about that. It's wonderful, really,
mm.
to watch somebody be able to do that.
Yes. I feel too that when we are living in what our purpose is, there's like I don't feel sad because of that. I feel like you said, yes, like there are moments and there could be sadness in that moment, but because I really do feel a strong calling purpose of
Yeah,
being able to serve in this way, then it doesn't feel sad because this doesn't,
exactly.
because you're really just following what you're
Yeah,
called to do and what your life experiences kind of led you to
yeah,
be and serve in this capacity and walking alongside someone in their journey, whether it is by them listening to a podcast or in your case, like doing the post, creating a book. My case also with the, coaching one-on-one, the time that you also used for, when you were a therapist, it feels it feels good to be able to serve
yeah,
in that way. So yeah, I
absolutely.
completely agree. Hi, I just had to come on and just kind of interrupt right now this episode that you're hearing. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you guys are listening to this conversation. And every single time I hear a guest, there's something new that I learn and something else that ends up showing up within me that I realize I still have to work on. And if by chance, as you're listening to this conversation, you're feeling the same, that there's parts of you that are being stirred up and you are navigating a life transition right now that feels just heavy and stressful and just layered with grief, I want you to know that you do not have to do it alone. I invite you to connect with me for a free 15-minute discovery call, and we'll explore what's coming up for you and see if working together feels like the right fit. Just check the show notes below for my email and reach out for details. I'd really love to support you in integrating these transitions with more ease and clarity. Can't wait to hear back from you. Okay, let's keep on listening to the episode. I recently watched one of your Instagram posts regarding the grief that we feel as a society. And in this particular one, you were talking about the when JFK died
Hmm.
and how it was never really like spoken that like everybody's and so and in life we and we go through all these, we went through this in the pandemic as well, the grief we all felt as a, but yet sometimes the actual like words of what it is we're feeling are not shared. Can you talk about that, about just the understanding of this grief that sometimes we feel as societies and the importance of honoring that?
Right, like a collective grief almost, and
Collective, yes, collective,
yes,
thank
and
you.
like you say, I mean, of course, during the pandemic, I think we all were feeling that so strongly together. I talk about JFK because I was 8 years old when he was killed, and the interesting thing about that is, boy, I don't think there was a person that didn't feel that. We had TV at the time. TV
Like the
was,
trauma, right? The trauma too.
yes,
You guys are in the middle of watching something and then all of a sudden you're seeing it play out live.
absolutely, and of course they showed that film over and over and over, and the funeral was on TV. And um, it's interesting because I can't really remember if that was something, my dad was still alive. I don't remember if we actually really spoke about it, but I know that we all watched it on television. Everybody did. In fact, I one of the things I said was, um, you either watched it in your home or you stood at a TV store. In those days, there were stores, dedicated to just buying a TV, or, you went to the department store and they had it turned on. Whatever it was, everybody was collectively um, watching that and involved in that. And I think there's something very healing and important about that because, like you said, even during the pandemic, um, I think we wanted to see things that on TV that brought us together, especially because we were all, for a while, we were mainly in our homes and not really going anywhere. And so I do. And I think that's the importance, honestly, of all these Instagram pages and social media where people can come and grieve together in a sense and not feel so alone. I think grief, more than almost anything we experience, is something that should not be done alone,
Mhm. Yeah, one of my guests said something like grief needs to be witnessed. And so that's why probably like in so many cultures,
Yeah,
either like in the Jewish culture, this
yeah,
guest was a rabbi, um, was mentioning with sitting Shiva. And so, for
yeah,
example, that because the grief needs to be witnessed and in that, but it's really because it's accompaniment, right? It's bringing that community, bringing that support of others
yes,
within that. And if we don't speak about emotions and we see them as taboo, then it's not okay. When they're also like minimized, when your grief is minimized, because sometimes you might even minimize your own grief. An example could be like if you had your pet die, but somebody else's loss is their parent, and you're like, how am I going to be talking about me missing
Right.
my dog? Or
Yeah.
if they had, you end up minimizing and comparing your grief. How does that grief comparison affect us in our grief when we bring that up? How have you seen that play out?
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest things that we can experience. Obviously, comparison just never works, to be honest, never. And in so many different ways, it can never work. For example, if somebody comes to you and says, my mom died, and this is what I'm feeling and this is what I'm going through. And somebody says back, oh, I understand because when my mom died, blah, blah, blah. And even if somebody has experienced the death of the same person in their life, you cannot compare. We don't know the ins and outs of that person's relationship. Um, and so it's never wise to compare. I remember as a kid, I heard it through my life a couple of times where, oh, it's so much worse to have your mom die than your dad. And okay, I mean, what can you even possibly say to something like that? So I think that, when you're talking with another griever, it's really important to allow that person to have their time to say what they're feeling and, uh, and to be able to sit back and really allow for that person to have their experience of their feelings rather than trying to compare what that was like for you. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that you don't have the right to also talk about your
Share.
grief.
Yeah, what's the
Yes.
difference in that aspect? I was just thinking of that because I sometimes bring up like, oh, if I say it, it's more for the relatability, not the comparison, but the
Yes.
aspect of the not trying to say I understand, because literally I cannot understand what you
Right.
are going through. But I've lived through grief in this way, whether it's, I don't know. It cannot be the same because it's not even the same for my own siblings, even if we all
Right.
lose this, the same. I
Yes,
mean,
exactly.
so how like in that aspect of the sharing of that accompaniment per se, or that empathy of relatability, do you do you have like a special way in which you could say like in that, like, are there certain words that you feel resonate if someone wanted to sit with that person, hear their story, but then also say, I'm here for you if you ever wanna talk about it. I've also lost XYZ, if not saying that, like, I don't know, like, do you have any good tips?
Honestly, I mean, I think that what you're saying is uh, absolutely one way to be able to say, I'm really hearing your pain and your heart. And I remember when, my dad died, I had so many feelings as well. And you can even ask, would it be helpful if I share some of what my experience of grief was like? And they may say, I'd like to hear that, but not right now, or, some other time, or yes, please tell me, what was it like for you? How did you get through this? So I think there's nothing wrong with saying, gosh, I understand grief. I've been there
Mhm.
too. Instead of saying, "Oh, I know just what you're feeling because,
Mhm.
my dad died too, and I know exactly what that's like," and, that can you hear the
Yeah,
difference?
completely, and then we end up hijacking the conversation because then we take it
Yes,
all to be about ourselves rather than in that moment it being about the griever. We like it's like, "Oh, you went through this, and then I went through," and then you end up going on your own,
you're
then you're
taking
like, yeah,
hijacking
you're
exactly is the
hijacking.
word.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
hijack it. And man, I can even as somebody that does accompaniment, I know I've hijacked conversations many times, maybe not
Of
about grief, but,
course,
like,
we all
in the
do.
we're humans, and sometimes these things go and you're like, "Man, I should have done that,"
Right.
The part of this part of hearing people's stories, I'm thinking back to the group setting of hearing being in a space in which, and I volunteered in a setting that was this space, and for that people had experienced, each group, for example, would group, and I don't know if that was kind of how you were in, based on the type of loss that they had experienced,
Yes.
whether it was a parent.
Yes.
Okay. So in that scenario, then for some people it's extremely helpful. And for other people, they go one time and they're like, this is not for me.
Yeah.
It's just not the
Yeah.
space. What do you feel, and that is the like, let's say, the sweet spot, like, of these
Mm.
conversations for them to really truly work when you're bringing up people sharing their stories?
Well, I think that the first thing is that I think that one of the first guidelines for a group situation is not giving advice to somebody else and talking about what worked for you. And that was where I saw real connection happen in groups because I think, in when grief is very fresh, so when somebody first dies in your life, it can be so hard to hear what anybody else has to say. And that is how it is in the very beginning. It should be all about you, and you should be turned inward and deep into your grief. And it's almost impossible to hear a whole group of other people talking about the death that they experienced. But there comes a point after several months where I think a lot of times grievers can begin to feel like, wow, I'm kind of longing to hear what somebody else has to say and how are they getting through this? And so it's sort of paying attention to that. Are you feeling like you're ready to take in what somebody else might be feeling and experiencing? And then I think it's really up to whoever is leading the group to be able to make sure that people aren't piling on each other and say, well, you really shouldn't have done that. Or let me tell you what you need to do next time. So I think that's really the what brings about the beauty of a group situation is really being able to hear how somebody else is moving through this.
Mhm, and that's the key of a good facilitator too, to be able to facilitate that
Absolutely.
conversation in a way that that when people are sharing, it's being loving, and it's being, yeah, they're again not trying to, like you said, give advice, but more just sharing their own experience and not
Yes.
trying to tell someone else how they should be
Yeah.
grieving or what. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. What are some of the things that most people, like, ask you to share about grief? Like, when you come and, like, cuz to have topics, to have the page to come on and do topics, like, what are these things that you're like, "Oh, I need to talk about this one?" Is it because people have come to you, and what are some of these questions that people have about grief?
On my page, you mean specifically, like, how do I
Yes, on your
come
page.
about
Yes,
to
yes.
write about what I write about?
Correct.
Um, so, it's just whatever I feel like that morning, to be honest.
I love it. I love it. Whatever
That's
has
my
come
that's
up.
my great secret.
Yes, I hear,
It
no, I
yeah,
understand. That's mine too, but sometimes it's like, if by chance, "Hey, I've noticed, so Sally and Penny and so have all been experiencing this," like, you like, right now for me, I'm noticing all this grief around all the kids going to college, and the comparison
yeah,
even in the grief of whether they're feeling that their child's going away, and I haven't done one about this, but it's like, oh, or whether even grieving that your child didn't end up going to the school you thought they were gonna go, and they're staying home, or they're doing this, all these, and then comparing, "Oh, this person posted about their child going to and now they're all set up in their dorm. My kid's staying home and commuting. I don't have that. So there's grief around even that, and I think of that, right? Is
Yeah.
that how yours kind of comes about? Is like why the
Yeah, I mean,
buzz?
my page is specifically about grief after a death. So I don't go into other kinds of topics
Perfect.
like that. So
Okay,
mine
perfect.
does stay, very specific to
Death
that.
centered. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes if there's been a death of a celebrity that I feel moved to write about, I might do that. And a lot of it is really trying to I think what I try mostly to do is often take an experience of mine, either as a child or now as an adult. I'll share that experience and then somehow take it to what might be universal about that. So I hope that by reading a personal story and then somehow showing how that can be universal, I think that's what helps um, people connect.
The relatability, yeah, the
Yes,
being yeah, again, because 'cause you're seeing yourself in that person's story, so when you're sharing, then
exactly.
you see yourself. I love that. Randy, is there something I have not asked you that you're like, "Oh my goodness, we need to say this. I need to say this to her audience, to this audience that's listening."
I think, the main thing that there are two things well, there's more than two things, but two things that I really love to focus on my page is one, because I was what I call a little griever. I still relate to myself as a little griever because I still carry my little 10-year-old heart inside of me. And I really want people out there who were little grievers to also be able to recognize that in themselves, who are now adults. It's really important to me because I think there are so many people out there that were little grievers that have never had a name to put to it, never really understood that about themselves as adults. So that has been a wonderful thing to see people come forward and say, oh my gosh, that's what I am. I'm a little griever. And so that's been just a wonderful thing. The other thing is that because I'm a griever for almost 60 years, I want people to know that it is a lifelong meandering through this thing we call grief. But that if we can learn to understand what grief is, if we can learn to meet ourselves where we are, I mean, to this day, 60 years later, I can be in the grocery store and see my dad's birthday stamped on the lettuce. I can, devolve into tears. And you know what? That's okay. I love my dad. And I want that to happen. And I want that to be okay. And I want other people to know that that's okay too. So those are real important things for me, as part of what I want to get across on Grief and Grits.
I love it. Thank you, Randy. So now how can people get in touch with you? How can people get the book? So Grief and Grits, it's your website. Is that correct?
Yes, so Grief and Grits is my page on Instagram and Facebook. My website for the book is either Grief and Grits, all one word, or Eddie's Brave Journey. Either way, and I don't sell
The
the book
book.
anywhere else. That's the only place
Only
I
on the
sell it.
okay. So
Yeah,
only on the website. Perfect. I
only
will
on
make
my
sure it'll
website.
be linked in the show notes. So people make sure to go on the
Wonderful.
show notes, or if they're following your pages, then they
Yes.
Instagram and Facebook, they can get it.
Yes,
Perfect.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
then can people connect with you? So aside from following, do you still do one-on-one? Like, do you still do
I
one-on-one
don't.
coaching?
I
Not
don't do
anymore?
any no, I don't do
Not
any
anymore?
one-on-one, but I am very happy if people wanna reach out to me, they can do that either through my website, you can DM me on Instagram, so, people do all the time message me or ask me a question about grief, just sometimes message me just to let me know that something has touched them or
Mhm.
how they're dealing with something. And that's wonderful. And I love it. So I'm always happy when people reach out.
I
Yeah.
love that. Thank you, Randy. Thank you
Oh,
so much
thank you,
again for being in the
Kendra.
space and sharing Eddie with us
Thank
and
you.
shedding is also sharing your little Randy with us too, and how
Thank you.
little Randy came into becoming now Randy, and the gifts that you bring to this world with the work that you do. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
And may I just say that I appreciate you and you're so gentle and so kind. And it's so easy to be here with you. And I just want to thank you for all that you're doing in the grief space as well.
Now you're making me cry.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Randy.
Yeah, I mean
Thank you.
that from my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.